All right, welcome back to the Evangelical Anglican. I am Jared Jones, your host. We got something a little different planned for you today. Normally, we've been doing the interviews and everything, and today we start a 4-part series on a topic that's near and dear to my heart, and something that I've been thinking about doing for a little while, about the idea of how to preach law and gospel. We're titling it "Preaching Law and Gospel." 2 words that to make your sermons matter. And I'm excited about the topic. It's going to be, I'll mention this a couple times in the video, but it's going to be kind of a 4-part series. One, introducing the idea and talking about some foundational kind of background concepts we want to have kind of working behind the scenes as we talk about this. The next week will be on the law, and then 1 week on the gospel, and then 1 week on actually crafting a law gospel sermon, a sermon that acknowledges and utilizes this great Protestant distinction. Now, a couple caveats. This is not a historical theology podcast. We're not going into the background on the law gospel distinction. We're not proving it. We're not going back to Augustine and back to Paul. I mean, we'll make use of the scriptures. There are other podcasts that do that, and that's great. I talk about that a little bit in the video. This is not trying to prove the law gospel distinction. We're kind of assuming the law gospel distinction. What this is doing is talking about the law gospel distinction from the standpoint of how it is used in a practical setting. And so like preaching. And so if you are a preacher, if you know preachers, if you're considering ministry and you want to think and learn about preaching, this is going to be a great spot. This is going to be a great video for you, and would love for you to share it with your friends. So, as always, we're grateful to have you here. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more content from the Evangelical Anglican, and join us as we discuss and look into how to preach the law and gospel distinction. Well, welcome back to the Evangelical Anglican on this first episode of our 4-part conversation series, course even, on how to preach law and gospel. How to preach law and gospel. And for this one, I think it's taken me all afternoon, but I think I figured out how to do a slideshow. So I'm going to try to share screen. All right, so preaching law and gospel. I've titled it Preaching Law and Gospel, 2 words to make your sermons matter. 2 words to make your sermons matter. Now, why are we doing this? Well, as an introduction, the goal of this series is to help your preaching do what it is meant to do. All right. Now that brings up the question, what is your preaching actually meant to do? I mean, there's plenty of times you've probably felt you get up there, you have a great sermon, you preach it, and maybe it falls on deaf ears. You preach it, maybe you do wonder. You get down from the pulpit, or you get down from the cool stage and the cool industrial table. Remember those? Remember all of a sudden preachers were all like, we're gonna have just like waist high tables. That's the new pulpit. And then a stool, a cool stool. And then maybe then you have your like TV screen is the new thing, I guess. But you get down from that and you kind of wonder, did anything I say actually matter? Like, did any of it mean anything? Does it do anything? And so I really want this to be, if you're a preacher, I want this course to be a help to you. There is a way for you, and I'm serious. Like a lot of times, people talk about preaching as this kind of miserable thing, and you get up there and you preach, and you don't know if you're doing anything. What I'm telling you is there is a way for you to preach that is effective, that gets the job done, and that gets actual results that you that actually bring encouragement to you as the preacher. Like, preaching does not have to be a miserable exercise. Um, and so if you're miserable with your preaching, it might be because your preaching is bad, and it just needs some help. And so this course, what we want to look at is how can your preaching do what it's meant to do? Because what I think is the problem with your preaching is not that you are bad at preaching. It's that you are trying to do something with preaching that it is not meant to do, and it is not capable of doing. And that's what we want to look at. So the goal of this is, I think, when you understand the law gospel distinction and how it applies to preaching, it can help your preaching do what it is meant to do. And we're going to talk about what it is meant to do. Now, a little bit about law and gospel. Often, law and gospel on the internet is treated as kind of this category in and of itself. If you type in YouTube law and gospel, it's a lot of people talking about what is the law, what is the gospel, as kind of these normative entities, these concepts, these doctrines. And that's good, and that's it. I'm not saying that's bad. I mean, most books on law and gospel are going to treat law and gospel like this. Um, One of the things that I think could be helpful to people is to talk about not necessarily just what is the law, what is the gospel. So that's what this class is not going to be explicitly on what is law, what is gospel, but rather to look at it through the lens of how do you use the law and the gospel in preaching. Um, how do you actually use the law and the gospel, these two words, in your preaching, in order to for your preaching to be effective? Um, because one of the things that I think people run into with law and gospel is they start to treat these things so separate and distinct, that it kind of becomes apparent that the goal is to kind of maybe get rid of one of these, like, and to treat them as like, well, it's just clearly delineated in scripture what's law, what's gospel. um so then you get your law highlighter out, and you kind of go through the Bible, and you kind of underline everything that's law. And then you get your gospel highlighter out, and you kind of go through the Bible, and you underline everything that's gospel. And then you tend to, if you're being set free, if you're really feeling this kind of, I feel like the law gospel distinction is really, in a lot of ways, changing my life. Then what you're going to do is you're going to start in a sense ignoring all the law passages. And then you're going to get accused of being antinomian, and you might be. And then, in an effort to not be antinomian, you're going to start highlighting all of the you're going to start highlighting all the law passages. Well, no, let's denigrate, let's downplay the gospel passages. Sure, there's a lot of promise, but there's a lot of demand, and there's a lot of expectation. And I think part of it is a misunderstanding of how the law and the gospel gets used. Another way that it gets misused in preaching is this kind of 1-2 punch. That every sermon has like an explicit law part of the sermon and then an explicit gospel part of the sermon. And in some ways that's true, but I mean, if you do that without really thinking through things, the preaching, law gospel preaching, can become um, almost manipulative. It almost feels like you are trying to set people up for an emotional, like, I'm it's I mean, it's almost gaslighting. It's like, I'm gonna turn up, like, I'm gonna be angry, 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 angry until I break you down, and then all of a sudden I'm kind of soft and kind, like this, like, Stockholm syndrome, or this um good cop, bad cop is how I kind of, the law gospel preaching is, I'm the bad cop for the first 30 minutes of the sermon, and I'm the good cop for the last 45 seconds. Um, and that, I don't think, is properly how to use law and gospel. Law and gospel in the Bible is not quite as easy to delineate, and to distinguish. And that's because the idea of law and gospel is not as quite as easy to distinguish as that. You can't just highlight law passages in the Bible. You can't just say that every time that the imperative is used, that's law. I mean, when Jesus tells the cripple man, take up your mat and walk, is that law or is that gospel? Um, I think if we understand properly how to preach them, we can we can begin to kind of work through some of that. Um, uh, Secondly, with preaching, hopefully this class addresses some problems that I've seen with preaching. A lot of times, how to preach videos and content. It talks about preaching. It's kind of all technique. It often comes down to how to engage, how to teach, how to connect, how to illustrate, how to use illustrations, how to project your voice. And all of these techniques are fine, but I think one of the things that I would love to look at in this course is what are the fundamentals of preaching underneath the current? What is preaching really all about? And so hopefully these next few videos will give you something really to hold on to with your preaching, that you can better know what preaching is for, what to expect, how to do it. All right. So the goal is both that we can understand the law gospel distinction better as a theological concept through the lens of preaching, um, and also that we can actually get better at preaching, that we can actually get more effective in our preaching. It is possible for you to preach in such a way that people come to your church to hear your preaching without you being the most erudite, intelligent. Um, uh, I've read every New York Times article and every essayist that comes out, and I can weave all these. You really don't have to do all that. You don't have to be Tim Keller. You don't have to be uh, John Mark Comer, or I don't know, whoever the current. I know Tim Keller has passed, sadly, but whoever the current great preachers are, you don't have to be them to still be effective in doing what God has called you to do as a preacher. So the goal of this is to talk about preaching, about the law gospel distinction, and to learn a little bit how to do it. Just as a caveat, I mentioned this probably in the intro. I say probably because I haven't recorded the intro yet, but I will mention this in the intro. This is not a historical theology class on the law gospel distinction. This isn't even trying to prove the law gospel distinction. There are videos galore that go through all that. I'm assuming the law gospel distinction. This isn't really trying to prove much. A lot of the theological points that I might make, I might not prove them. If you disagree that they are true, go elsewhere. I mean, but I think I'm going to present them in a way that's going to be pretty compelling. But if you want to get ticky tack on me, or if this is not like, if you're looking for, well, what's Luther's view of law gospel distinction and Calvin's view of the law gospel distinction, and how did that merge into the Anglican Reformation? I don't want to say I don't care. I don't care. And that's not what this video is really about. This video is trying to look at how I, Jared Jones, understand how the law gospel distinction affects preaching. It's my opinion. And where it's not my opinion, I'll try to cite. And so you're free to watch it, and you're free to not like it and disagree. And you can leave it in the comments if you disagree with me, and I'll try to respond. So the goal of these videos is to teach how to take the theological concept of the distinction between law and gospel and to apply it to your preaching. So the goal is to take the theological concept of the law gospel distinction. We're not going to explain it too much. And apply it to your preaching. Now, this is going to be in 4 parts. The first one is today. It's the introduction and the foundational doctrines, or kind of core principles that we're going to be looking at. Then after, I'm going to do one on the law, preaching the law. I'm going to do one on preaching the gospel. And then I'm going to do one that's really trying to get, how do you in a sermon preach the law gospel distinction? I mean, how do you actually craft it into a sermon? That's what I think the layout of these classes these videos is going to be. So, without further ado, foundations. What are some foundational theological concepts that we want to look at? What doctrines undergird good preaching? Now, I'm going to correlate good preaching with law gospel distinction preaching. Whenever I say good preaching, what I mean is preaching that properly understands the distinction between law and gospel and uses it and applies it. That is good preaching. Now, before we talk about that, so this is not the law gospel distinction. This is what are some core assumptions that I think give the context, the pastoral context for the law gospel distinction. Um, and maybe the pastoral context of preaching. What's actually theologically going on when you are preaching? This is not an exhaustive list of the. I mean, every theological doctrine is kind of comes to bear at preaching. These are a couple things for our context that I want to look at. So, what doctrines undergird good preaching? I get these from today. I get some of these from the book Grace in Practice by Paul Zoll. It's actually, I'm using it to prop up my camera right now. So it is both good for propping up your preaching and your camera for your YouTube channel. But this is one of my favorite books. I'm not saying I agree with everything in it. There are a couple things in it that I don't agree with, but that's why I love the way Paul Zoll writes. He writes boldly with strong opinions, and that allows you to actually interact with somebody and think. Most editors today, I think, are putting out just content that it's either completely heretical and awful, or it's so safe that you can't even think when you're reading it. You just read it and you go, I couldn't understand why anyone would disagree with that. I guess it's fine. And Paul writes very boldly and plainly, and I do agree with 99% of this book. But in it, he's got a chapter called the 4 pillars. Now we're only going to look at 2 of them in this video, because the other 2 we're going to use throughout the rest of the videos. But he calls the 4 pillars of grace, theology of grace. And so for our purposes, we're going to be looking at 2 of these pillars that Paul uses in kind of setting up the foundation for a theology of grace. We're going to take 2 of them and look at this is the kind of pastoral context in which you are preaching. So the first of these, the 2 pillars we want to look at, is anthropology and pneumatology. Anthropology and pneumatology. All right. So first, we're going to look at anthropology. What is the human condition that we are preaching into? When you get up there in the pulpit and you look out at the people, who are they and what on earth is going on? All right. Because and this is huge, you have to understand this. If you misinterpret what's going on out there in the congregation, you're going to totally miss them in your preaching. You'll hit them, but not hit them where you want to hit them. You'll hit them in their brain. You'll hit them in their self-righteousness. You'll hit them in their fear. You will hit them in their anxiety. There's tons of places where your preaching could land, and all of them bad landings. Where what I want to talk about is how your preaching can hit their heart, affect their heart. And in order to do that, we got to understand who are they and what is going on with them. So first, we want to look at anthropology, and there's 4 parts of anthropology that I want to look at. First is the doctrine of original sin. In our working definition, I know this isn't a proper theological definition. Article this and the Westminster Confession says. Augustine said that's all fine for theology, and that's great, and I love that. For our purposes, why does original sin matter for preaching? Original sin matters for preaching because it conveys with it the idea that our problems, our sin, our issues are built in, not externally sourced. Our problem, the people, when you look out there, their biggest problem in their world is actually built into themselves. It comes from within, not external to them. Matthew chapter 15, Jesus has this interaction with the Pharisees and teachers of the law. Then some Pharisees and teachers of the law came to Jesus from Jerusalem and asked, "Why do your disciples break the tradition of the elders? They don't wash their hands before they eat." Jesus replied, "And why do you break the command of God for the sake of your tradition? For God said, 'Honor your father and mother,' and anyone who curses their father and their mother is to be put to death. But you say that if anyone declares that what might have been used to help their father and mother is devoted to God, they are not to honor their father and mother with it. Thus you nullify the word of God for the sake of your tradition." Well, now, in this initial part, the Pharisees come to Jesus with a gotcha. "We got you. Your disciples are not properly washing their hands." There's an external ritual that they have to do in order to be pure. They need to wash their hands. And Jesus immediately goes straight to the heart, because he immediately says, "Well, before we start talking about that, why do you break the command of God?" Now, that would have been offensive to the Pharisees, first of all, because everything they do is built to not break the command of God. But what they do is they play fast and loose with the commandments. So the things that you own that you ought to maybe provide for your father and your mother in their old age, if you have a tax write-off, or maybe like a righteousness write-off, that's what, that if you can write that off, if you can devote that to the Lord, then you don't have to give it to your father and your mother. Like, "Oh, mom and dad, I would love to bring you into our home, but this extra room we have, it's devoted to the Lord. I can't possibly let you have it. Mom and dad, I would love to pay for your care, but this money that I would use to do that, we've actually set it aside. We have conveniently devoted that for the Lord." And then your mom and your dad, "Well, okay, what about your extra car? We could really use an extra car to just as we get around." And "Oh yeah, I meant to tell you that car we also devoted to the Lord." And that was how they were playing fast and loose. They had these kind of ways to get these little write-offs, that you could say, "Well, that's not included in the honoring your father and mother, because that we're devoting to the Lord. So now you can keep it for yourself." In other words, there was a way of externalizing the commandment and making the commandment simply something that you as long as you follow certain external actions, you were keeping the commandment. And Jesus immediately calls them up and says, "No, it's an internal thing. It's about your heart. God is not an idiot. God is not mocked. That God knows your heart, and He demands loyalty and love from your heart, more than He demands some kind of external obedience." And so He says, "You are actually nullifying the word of God for the sake of your tradition that you kind of made up." And then he'll continue, "You hypocrites! Isaiah was right when he prophesied about you. These people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. They worship me in vain. Their teachings are merely human rules." You honor God with your lips externally, but your heart is far from Him. Jesus called the crowd to Him and said, "Listen and understand. What goes into someone's mouth does not defile them, but what comes out of their mouth, that is what defiles them." Then the Pharisees came to him and asked, "Do you know that the Pharisees were offended when they heard this?" And we would say, but probably. Now, what is Jesus saying there? Well, He's saying, first of all, uh, the source of the problem that human beings are dealing with, what we would call sin. And a lot of times, we all know that preaching has to address sin. Um, that the problem with sin is not external to us. The problem of sin is not external out there, but rather is coming up from within. That your problem and my problem is not actually that we are constantly beset by all of these things, that if we can only just get rid of these things, then we could be righteous. But what Jesus is saying is actually the problem is coming from within. Original sin means that sin is built into the human experience. that you are a sinner from birth, that you don't have to learn how to sin, that you don't have to be taught how to sin, that you don't have to be taken down the wrong. We don't want you to hang out with those kids; they're going to take you down the wrong path. Now, in some ways, that's true. You can go worse, um, but the real problem is within you. The real problem is already built in from the very beginning. Um, and the reason why this is important is to ignore this doctrine plays into the sinner's desire to control their circumstances or to shift blame. I had a couple typos in there, but that's okay. We're going to move on. But to ignore this doctrine, to preach as if original sin doesn't exist, is to preach as if your problems, your biggest problems, are actually external to you. Your biggest problem is your marriage. Your biggest, and therefore, really, your biggest problem will be your spouse. Your biggest problem is politics. It's whoever's the president right now. That is actually your biggest problem. And what that does is this, for sinners like me, it allows us an opportunity. It plays into our game, because the game that you and I are constantly playing in our lives is we are constantly doing one of two things. We're constantly either trying to externalize everything. So whenever problems come up, we look for external reasons why those problems are there so that we can either control it or so that we can shift blame. Think about the last time your spouse told you something that you were doing wrong. You either try to look for a kind of easy fix solution. Well, I haven't gotten enough sleep because you aren't taking the kids, enough time. I need more sleep. Or you tried. And therefore you were trying to keep control of the situation. Or you tried to blame shift. It's not, why do you yell at the kids like that? Um, well, it's not. It's because of my father, and he yelled at me, and that might be true in a sense, but is that helpful? Is it, friends? Is it helpful to go to your kids and say, "Hey, just I do yell at you sometimes because my dad yelled at me." Do that. Does that? Oh, okay, Dad. That makes a lot. Thank you. That makes a lot more. No, I don't really care why you're doing it. Think about, maybe you got in a car wreck, and and it was your fault, and you said, "Well, my dad didn't teach me very well as a driver." It's like, I don't care. I don't care. You now owe me for the car. So to ignore the doctrine of original sin is to play into this game that the sinner is always playing, which is to constantly externalize their problems. You can do this through preaching about politics. That's why you should almost never preach about politics, because all politics is externalizing human problems. What I mean is the current political entertainment complex is all inner anxiety being projected onto external things that then we think, if we win an election, we'll control this. That's all it is. And if you preach into that, remember a while ago when everyone was saying, like, if you go to a church where the pastor doesn't address this, well, I'm not saying you can't address certain things, but in a lot of ways, what those churches were, they quickly become churches where the preacher is actually just playing into the hands of sinners. Because what we want as sinners, and I'm talking about me as a sinner, is we want a tight narrative that externalizes all our problems, so that we can either control it. If we win an election, everything's going to be fine. If we take America back to what it used to be, everything in your life is going to be fine. If we become a liberal utopian, like communist society, everything will finally be fine. If we fix all of the problems of poverty, everything will be fine, blah, blah, blah. Or if we blame shift, where, we say, we kind of look for someone worse than us. these disgusting conservatives, these disgusting liberals, they disgust me, and I think they should disgust you too. And I'm bold enough to say it. That drives me crazy. Like preachers who think it's bold of me to say what everyone else on TV is saying. It's bold of me to be willing to say what well, frankly, a lot of people are saying. And you're always going to find an audience for it. You might like tick off a couple people, but there will be an audience for that. Because why? Because people like to have their problems externalized. Get out. Don't meddle in me very much. I want it out there as quick as possible so that I can either, again, control or shift the blame. It was not me, it's her. It's not me, it's this issue, and I think that I can fix it. And maybe your sermon will be a helpful tip on how you can fix your marriage. All right. So, if you don't believe that sin is coming from within and rather believe that sin is coming from the outside, then you're going to play right into this and your preaching is not going to be effective. Okay. Second is the idea of total depravity. Paul Zoll, his kind of my paraphrase of his definition of it, of total depravity, is this human nature of original sin is equally distributed. The totality of our being is touched by sin. Total depravity, as many of you probably know, is not utter depravity. It's not us saying you're as worse as you're as bad as you could possibly be. You're disgusting. You're the worst thing I could possibly imagine. No. Total depravity is simply the acknowledgement that this sin that is coming up from within us touches all parts of us. There is no part of you that is untouched and free from the sinful nature. There is no part of you that is kind of this pure, innate, good little golden nugget of a core. That's kind of the working therapeutic idea, is like underneath all of this, remember Shrek, and he's talking about he's an onion. The idea is kind of like at the bottom of all of these layers, there's this really good core. One of my favorite artists was Ryan Adams, not Brian Adams, but Ryan Adams. I haven't listened to him in a while, so he puts out an album like every 6 months. So don't try to tell me what his current stuff is. I have no idea. But he had this song called One, or no, it's called Two. I think it's called Two. But the chorus basically says, it takes two when it used to take one. And it was just a great line about a breakup. It takes two when it used to take only one. Now that she's gone, I realize I need her, and I'm not okay without her. And he has this one line in it that I think is like such a great line to depict why he's probably broken up with in the first place. He says, "I've got a really good heart. I just can't catch a break. If I could, I'd treat you like you wanted me to, I promise. Yeah, I've got a really good heart. I just can't catch a break." I mean, is there anything more self-indulgent than that? I mean, is there anything more, I mean, is that really going to be the thing that gets her back? Because of whatever he's done to her, being like, yeah, but sure, I've mistreated you, but at my core, I'm a good person. Have you ever seen this with like relationships when you try to tell someone that they did something and they appeal to their motive? Well, I had good motives. I don't really care about your motives. In fact, the fact that you bring up your motives mean you had worse motives. Like it's all about you. So total depravity is this idea that original sin is coming up from within us and it touches every part of us. There is no part of our nature that is untouched by sin. It affects our bodies, our intellect, our emotions, our thoughts, and yes, even our wills. Now, to ignore this doctrine is to lead people to believe that they are ultimately in control of their lives, and that there is a good spark within them. A lot of preaching fundamentally comes from the angle that, yes, you are a sinner, you have sin, but there's something within you, either your will or this kind of divine spark, that if we fan that into a flame, you can fix your problems. Um, that if the will is untouched by sin, um, and if is a good thing in you that's totally free from the effects of sin, well, then preaching is really going to come down to trying to appeal to that and trying to um, uh, work with that. You're trying to work with the sinner instead of getting the sinner to look for help elsewhere. So this leads us to our third one, which is the bound will. That the human being under the effects of sin is unable to bring himself or herself to choose God or even choose the good, not consistently so. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, one, theologically, we would all agree, I hope. Who knows where, if you're watching this, but theologically, this is rooted in the idea that your will is a part of you. You don't have some kind of superhuman will that all of a sudden just it's like all of a sudden I have this new will. That your will is human and it's part of you and it's always been a part of you and it will always continue to be a part of you, and that it is not unaffected by sin, that your will has been affected by sin. Sin has touched it. You do not choose to do what is right. And to go one step further, you cannot choose to follow God. A sinner cannot choose to cannot choose God. Paul talks about in Ephesians 2 that we're dead in our sins. Dead things can't do anything other than continue to be dead in their sin. And therefore, you cannot, of your own free accord, choose God. And you also cannot choose the good. Now, maybe once in a while you could choose to do like one good thing. You know, you every year you set out a new resolution and you choose it, but eventually, um, your will is going to catch up with you, and you're going to find yourself unable to really fix the problems in your life. Um, uh, there's a quote, I think it was Gerhard Forde, once said something along the lines of this: that the alcoholic, which is a great picture of a sinner, the alcoholic is free to choose between beer, wine, or liquor, but they are not free to stop drinking. That your will is still there, it's still active, you can still use it, and you'll find yourself using it. You'll choose this, choose that. You're still liable for the choices you make. You're still, I mean, again, the people in in your congregation know the choices they make. They know that they're liable for the choices they make, and yet they feel unable to choose otherwise. That they are free to choose between beer, wine, and liquor, but they're not free to stop drinking. So the people in the congregation are bound in sin, and their wills are bound, and therefore they cannot simply choose to fix their lives, because if they could, then they probably would have. And so the people in the congregation, to ignore this doctrine is to take your preaching into the unhelpful world of education and inspiration. If you believe that people's wills are fundamentally free, then what is going to happen is your preaching is going to move into education or inspiration. Now, this is where we're actually going to start touching base with a lot of preaching out there that actually assumes that people in their congregation are free moral agents willing to make the decision to fix and amend their lives, if only they either know, one, what to do, or two, have the inspiration to do it. That believing that people's wills are free means you believe that the real problem is actually not internal to you, but the real problem is external. You either don't know the right thing to do, so your preaching becomes very moralistic, very didactic, very, hey, I'm going to teach you to obey the commands our Lord gave you, which is what Jesus tells us to do. I mean, it's valid, right? I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. Um, but if your understanding is that they are pure, like free moral agents, you are going to begin to focus all of your teaching and preaching on fixing them, showing them the right thing to do. And then what's going to happen is you're going to get really frustrated because you're going to constantly be telling people what to do and they're never going to do it. Or they will for like a minute and then they won't. Um, and then your preaching will also move into, well, all right, they know what to do. They're just not properly motivated. So it's either knowledge or motivation. And now my job as the minister is to inspire. And so you'll think of examples and you'll think of motivational tricks. You will sometimes that motivation will come from a place of anger. And you will motivate by fear, motivate by anxiety. If you don't do this, you're going to ruin your marriage. If you don't do this, you're going to ruin your kids. If you don't do this, your kids are never going to grow up to know the Lord. If you don't lead your kids in prayer every single night, your kids are going to grow up to be atheists. You know, will that work? Well, it might work to get someone to do something one time. That night, they might go home and they might gather the kids around. And the kids are going to notice dad seems really anxious about this. And dad's going to be really angry because he has to do this. It has to happen. Gathered around, stop talking, let's pray. Right. Um, and the kids are going to pick up something about that felt very anxiety driven and very anger driven. And I'm not totally sure what it was, but I do know I don't want to do that again. And that's actually a good way to make them atheists. But anyways, I digress. That you're gonna go into the world of motivation. You can also try to do motivation from a more positive angle. Share great stories of how this changed people's lives. You can cast a lot of vision with this. If we do this, think of the effect that this could have in our city, in our world. We could change the world. God, I mean, remember growing up in middle school and like youth group, and you heard this like Jesus changed the world with just 12 disciples. My high school. I mean, I remember hearing this all the time. We'd have chapel. Jesus changed the world with 12 disciples, and look around. There's 400 of us, you know? And I remember as a kid thinking, yeah, but you're not Jesus. Like I know you, and I know you. You're a mess. Um, and but a lot of times you can sell people on motivation of like, well, look, if we do this, we're going to change the city. We're going to transform society. We're going to transform the world. We're going to transform America. All of this stuff. And again, it is a good way to get a quick change in a couple people who are kind of high action oriented people. There are people that just are very. They're still all of this is still true. They are still sinners and they are still bound in sin. But they're very. They see a problem and they go about changing it, and they kind of fix their life, and they're boom, 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 boom. Those people are going to flock to this kind of preaching. All right. You can, yeah, I mean, you can grow a church with this kind of preaching. You can get the best like lawyers and engineers and architects and business owners, all of that. I mean, these people will flock to this. People that are just highly like, I see a problem, I resolve it, and I move forward to the next thing. The problem is that your preaching will not what you won't have show up in your church is people who are really suffering and people who are really sinning. Because people who are really suffering actually don't really want to be inspired. And people who are real sinners don't really feel like there's anything, um, uh, there's any hope for change. Because if you've experienced living with a bound will very long and you've been aware of it, for instance, an alcoholic is not going to show up to one of those churches. Have you ever dealt with an alcoholic? Can you inspire them? Can you motivate them with fear? Can you try to hold their feet to the fire? Sure, you can do all that, but it doesn't work. It might get them to sober up for a day, maybe 2 days, but they're going to go back, and they know they're going to go back. So the bound will is it's a reality that you have to be aware of as a preacher, so that your preaching doesn't go into the unhelpful world of education and inspiration. Fourth is the devil. Now, as an Episcopalian, I don't talk about the devil very much, but the devil is alive, and good law and gospel preaching and good preaching understands that the devil is real and active. Revelation 12, verse 10. Then I heard a loud voice in heaven say, "Now have come the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Messiah. For the accuser of our brothers and sisters, who accuses them before our God day and night, has been hurled down." That the devil is the accuser of the brethren, of the brothers and the sisters. And he stands before God and accuses them day and night. There's a passage, read it. Go to Zechariah chapter 3 and read the passage where Joshua, the high priest, stands up in the throne room, and Satan is there, and he's accusing Joshua. He's layering accusations at him. The devil is alive and active already, and his is the voice of accusation, condemnation, stress, pressure, and demand. His is the voice of fear. His is the voice of you must change, and if you don't, then you will be cast out. His is the voice of accusation, bringing up all of the things that you've done. His is the voice that tells you, you're going to run right back to your sin. And he's out there when you're preaching. He's there, and he's talking, and he's been talking. He was talking before they even came in. When they're on their way into church, he's sitting there going, "Well, you have no business walking into church. Who do you think you are? Who do you think you're trying to prove that you're some fancy Christian heading to church? You just yelled at your kids on the way in. You're no Christian. You're some hypocrite." That is the voice of the accuser, and he's constantly there. And your voice, as a preacher, your voice is either going to line up with his, or it's going to say something different. And so many preachers, I think, their voice lines up with the devil's. And I hate that. And I know that you hate that. I know you don't want that. So the devil is alive, active already, and his voice is the voice of accusation, condemnation. Now, those are two biblical words, but then I added stress, pressure, demand. Why? Because that is what accusation and condemnation feel like in a modern world. Stress, this sense of I have to be somebody I'm not, this pressure and this demand. I ought to be further along than where I am right now. And it's quite frankly embarrassing that I am who I am. And the fact that I'm even going to church after I've been going to church for 20 years and I'm still the exact same person is quite embarrassing. And it's important that no one else knows that. All right. That's the devil. And he's talking to people all the time. So, summary of these kind of four ideas of anthropology. The condition that you and I are preaching into is beyond all hope. They do not need a word of, fix your life. They're beyond that. Our problem is internal to us. Our wills are part of the problem. We cannot choose what is right. And on top of that, we are accused of our failures day and night. That's the people that you're talking to. You're not talking to a bunch of people who, hey, I don't know. I'm willing to do the right thing, but just don't tell me what it is. That's not who shows up. Who shows up is sinners who are weary and exhausted. Matthew 9:35-38. Jesus went through all the towns and villages, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom and healing every disease and sickness. And when he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. And then he said to his disciples, "The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field." That he sees the crowds and he has compassion. Good law and gospel preaching begins in compassion. Good preaching begins in compassion. Compassion. to look upon the crowds and have compassion. Why? Because they are harassed and helpless. They are not moral free agents who just need to be told what to do or need a good kick in the rear. They are harassed and they are helpless. They are beset by problems and they are helpless to fix those problems. That's actually the condition that you and I are preaching into. Harassed and helpless people. And then you get up as the preacher and you have an opportunity to either say something that's going to reinforce the situation. You are harassed and helpless, and now I'm going to harass you, and I'm going to demand more from you, and I'm going to demand that you fix your life, even though you are helpless to do so, or you're going to offer something different. The second theological concept we want to look at is pneumatology, and this is much quicker than the other one. Pneumatology, good preaching doesn't only instruct or inspire, it imparts something, or rather someone. That good preaching is not me giving information to you. It's not a lecture. It's not a TED talk. It's not an inspirational speech. It's not a motivational speech. It's not a poem. It's not a love note. It is me actually delivering something. I am doing something with my words. I am giving something, or more importantly, and more correctly, I'm giving someone. Do you realize as a preacher, you have the opportunity to give over to harassed and helpless sinners, someone to them? Galatians 3, chapter 3, verse 2. I would like to learn just one thing from you. Did you receive the Spirit by the works of the law or by believing what you heard? Did you receive the Spirit by works of the law, things you did, you drummed up, or did you receive the Spirit by believing what you heard? What's Paul saying? That the Spirit of God comes through preaching. Hearing the word of God, his Spirit is imparted to people, given over to people. That you in your preaching every single Sunday can actually give to harassed and helpless sinners God himself. Are you kidding me? That's way better than like an application point for how to fix your finances. Screw that. I'll give you God himself. How about that? The goal of preaching is to actually give Christ to people by his Spirit in all his healing and forgiving power through the word preached. The goal of preaching, and what we're going to look at over these next few videos, is to actually give something, to give someone, to give Christ by his Spirit in all of his forgiving and healing power through his word. That when you preach, and if you understand the law gospel distinction, and if you use it, and if you use it correctly, and I do mean that, if you use it correctly, what you can do in your preaching is take harassed and helpless sinners and change their life. Change their life. And you can actually free them. You can free bound wills. You can actually bring healing to sin that is indwelling within us. That people can even actually gain some self-control over their lives. It is a fruit of the Spirit to have self-control. We believe in that. We're for that. But that's only going to come when the Spirit comes through the word of Christ. That's going to come through the gospel. Now, as an example, I want to look at this quick story from George Eliot's short story, Janet's Repentance. My copy it's in this this book called Scenes of a Clerical Life. It's one of the stories in there. It involves Janet Dempster. Janet is the abused wife of Mr. Dempster, who's an alcoholic, and Janet, has in her abuse has become an alcoholic herself, and also in hopes that she can get her husband to love her, and he will never love her. And her husband hates this new evangelical vicar. the Evangelical Anglican. Um, this evangelical vicar who's come to the village, and he has begun to preach that Jesus loves sinners. And that has not sat well with Mr. Dempster, who is a Pharisaical, hypocritical member of the vestry, like member of the chapter, whatever it is called back then. But he's an alcoholic, he's an abuser, he's an evil person. And yet he's very high in his station in the village and in the church. And he hates Mr. Tryon, and his wife, who he abuses, has turned to alcohol and has turned to spreading rumors and trying to ruin Mr. Tryon, the evangelical vicar, trying to ruin his reputation and become his enemy, all in hopes that her husband will love her. Well, eventually, throughout the story, Janet becomes more and more, she realizes more and more that her life really is falling apart, that none of this is working, that she is actually harassed and helpless. And at one point, when she really comes to a moment of self-reflection and a moment of honesty, she says this, and this is so important for preaching. This is a quote. She was tired. She was sick of that barren exhortation. Do right and keep a clear conscience, and God will reward you, and your troubles will be easier to bear. She wanted strength to do right. She wanted something to rely on besides her own resolutions, for was not the path behind her all strewn with broken resolutions? How could she trust in new ones? She had often heard Mr. Tryon, the evangelical vicar, Mr. Tryon laughed at for being fond of great sinners. She began to see a new meaning in those words. He would perhaps understand her helplessness. That line, she wanted strength to do right. She was sick of barren exhortation. Do right. Keep a clear conscience. She was weary from constantly people in the church telling her to do right. Because what she noticed was just because, and this is going to be very important over the next 2 videos especially, just because the law is preached does not mean we are given the power to fulfill it. Barren exhortation. So many sermons today can be classified as barren exhortation. Do right. Keep a clear conscience. But it does not give anything. It doesn't give what she says that she needs, the strength to do right. Because if we have people relying on their own resolutions, if your goal of preaching is to get people to resolve to fix their life, then there's going to be this devil in their head going, you mean resolve like you did last week? Is this where you resolve to stop drinking so much? That's cute because you did that the past 4 weeks in a row, right? She wanted something to rely on besides her own resolutions, for was not the path behind her all strewn with broken resolutions? The path she just came from has all of her broken resolutions all over. How can she trust that she's going to keep new resolutions? And she's helpless, and she reaches out, or she begins to think in her mind. And we'll pick back up because I think this is going to be a story that we might tag in throughout our time together. But she keeps coming back to it. Well, maybe this evangelical vicar will have something to say. Maybe something more than just barren exhortation, because he is fond of great sinners, and he might understand her helplessness. And my question that I want to leave you with today is if Janet showed up in your church, would she hear barren exhortation? Would she be told to make new resolutions to change? Or would she be given strength? Given the strength to change. So the goal of these episodes will be to dive deeper into how to preach using the law gospel distinction so that you as a preacher cannot give your people just barren exhortation, but instead impart God's spirit to bring, not spirito, but spirit, to bring about strength, fortitude, healing, and courage to weary, exhausted, and wounded souls. That's the incredible opportunity that you have as a preacher. Or if you're a seminarian, that's the incredible opportunity that you are training for to be a preacher, is to actually hand over the goods. And by the goods, I mean Jesus Christ himself by his Spirit through his word preached. You are not giving people ideas or motivation or inspiration. You are giving them Christ himself, and he is going to minister to them. And it's going to happen right in front of you. And it's going to be the coolest thing in the world for you to see people snap to life when they get this. So next week, we're going to look at the law, how to preach the law. We're going to look at the gospel, how to preach the gospel, how to understand the law, how to understand the gospel. And then finally, we'll look at literally how can you kind of put together a law gospel sermon. So thank you for tuning in. I hope this isn't too didactic and too bland. Look, if no one watches these, I'll go back to doing interviews and stuff. This is just something I wanted to try. So thank you, and we will see you next week.